I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and behind me I've got the new Mercedes-Benz EQE SUV, and today I'm going to give it a thorough first review here on Australian roads. The EQE SUV has landed here in Australia. It's been out overseas for some time, but it's only just arriving now to take on vehicles like the BMW iX and the updated Audi Q8 e-tron. So is the Mercedes-Benz the best bet in this emerging mid-size to large luxury EV SUV space? I'm going to let you know in today's video. The one that I've brought along specifically is the cheapest one, and I think this is going to be enough EQE SUV for most people. This is the 300. It costs $134,900 before on-road costs. So no, this car is not going after the likes of the Tesla Model Y. It's going after more traditional Mercedes-Benz customers and maybe people that do already have an EV and they want to move up to a luxury SUV now. So does it hit the brief? We're going to find out. But before we start, hit subscribe below. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct. Later in the video, we're going to take the EQE 300 SUV for a drive, and I'll also let you know how much range you should expect from its 89 kilowatt hour battery. But for now, I want to take a look at the interior because, of course, the cabin is where I think Mercedes is going to sell quite a few of these vehicles because it's a desirable place to sit. You may or may not like the very aerodynamic styling of the EQE SUV. Personally, I think it looks all right. I think it looks better than the EQE sedan, but not innately attractive because I think it could use a few more character lines. But here in the interior, I actually think Mercedes is onto a reasonably good thing because the design is pleasing to the eye, it's comfortable, and for the most part, it's high quality. Now, the car that I've chosen to film with today has the pretty out there Neva Grey and Biscay Blue interior, which is an option. There's only two interior choices, which is odd, I think, for a relatively expensive premium car. There's not much customization on offer. One wheel design, two interior choices, and this is the light interior. It's personally what I would go for because it really brightens the cabin and makes the EQE SUV feel more luxurious and expensive, but having a white steering wheel certainly won't be for everybody, especially if you get, say, fake tans. This won't be aging particularly well, but the alternative is an all black cabin. Now the seats themselves, they look really cool. They look quite light in their design. They're perforated and they have heating. You can also get climate front seats, but interestingly only on the AMG version of this car. The seats have got a bunch of electric adjustment in them and I was able to find a comfy, supportive driving position very quickly. Equally, the wheel, the white wheel, you can adjust it electronically and you'll find an ergonomic spot for that without too much of a problem. Now the tech in here can go one of two ways. This car has the standard technology package with a central touchscreen and a floating digital driver's display. And for me, this is the way to go because you get this dashboard finished with a beautiful real wood trim, which looks really nice. However, for $6,700, you can go for the Hyperscreen, which transfers all of this into a glass panel. So you lose all of the wood trim, but you get three screens kind of under glass. Now, it is a technical achievement. It does look impressive, but it actually doesn't look as expensive or premium as the standard configuration, and I find this a little bit easier to use and see. So you can try out the Hyperscreen. You might be able to find a car in a dealer with it and see if you like it, but for me, this is the way to go. Now, all EQEs come highly specified as standard. In fact, if you go for the all-wheel drive versions of this car, you don't really get any more equipment. You just get more power. So the cars have Burmester premium sound as standard with Dolby Atmos. This is the first car on the market to have Dolby Atmos. And if you have Apple AirPods Pro or AirPods Max, you might already know about Dolby Atmos in terms of it placing the music spatially around you. Now, I've had a good listen to the system today. It's very clear, it's very crisp, and you can hear the sounds moving, but perhaps the effect is not quite as pronounced as it is when you're wearing headphones, but still very nice to have. You do, of course, get factory navigation, wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and that all works very well indeed. As for the build quality in here, it's pretty good. The materials used are all high-end and nice. It's largely free of untoward noises. You can kind of force a creak out of the dashboard if you really go pushing the wood veneers like no normal person is ever really going to do. And on the whole, I think the car is screwed together well. It is built in the Mercedes SUV plant in Alabama in the USA, right next to the battery factory, which sources the battery that goes underneath this car, but still, it feels as good as the German EQE sedan to me. All right, let's check out the back seat. Now, the back seat of the EQE SUV is where you really get some of the benefits of this vehicle riding on a dedicated EV platform, which is the Mercedes EVA2 platform. So that's used for the EQE sedan, EQS sedan, and then also the SUV versions of both cars. Kind of confusing naming structure. You can tell me in the comments whether you think it makes sense to you. But anyway, EQE SUV is what we're reviewing today. And for myself, at 6 foot, 183 centimeters, headroom is very good. The panoramic opening sunroof is standard. I love that it opens. Having a fixed glass roof is like the worst of both worlds to me. So at least this one does in fact open up. Legroom is excellent, toe room is very good, and you could definitely fit a fifth person here because the floor is completely flat. Amenities back here are good too. Air vents, USB-C ports, all the high-end material, soft materials continue to the back. Now, if I was going to nitpick, I'd point out that the rear seats are not heated in this vehicle. You do get heated rear seats in cars that are much more affordable than this now. And the flip-down armrest, we've got a device holder there, we've got 2 cup holders as well, but we don't kind of have additional storage within the armrest itself. Nor is this a 7-seater. You can get 7 seats in the EQS SUV above this that we haven't driven yet on local roads, but that car is much more expensive again. Moving around the back of the EQE SUV now, you do see more of the aerodynamics forward styling. It does have a low drag coefficient, as low as 0.251, which is amazing for an SUV, but I think you know this is an EV when you look at it. Some other cars in this segment, like the Audi Q8 e-tron, they kind of look like a petrol or diesel SUV, which some people will prefer. You can let me know down below in the comments. Now this one's black. Metallic paint is free with this car or included with the price. It's a pretty wet and muddy day today. You'll have to excuse that. But whoa, opening up that power tailgate reveals 520 litres of space. And if you go for the Neva grey interior, you get a Neva grey boot liner. Some other brands, if you go for the light leather, you still get black boot lining, such as Volvo, for instance. That would have been a little bit smarter here because I know I'm probably not tidy enough to keep this looking spick and span, so I'd be putting a boot liner down immediately. Now we do have cargo blind here, a couple of cargo hooks, bit of netting off to the side to stop stuff rolling around, and underneath the boot floor, a deep additional storage area. And we've got these 2 kind of neat charging cases, which you can actually slide back further. And that's because the EQE SUV comes with a charging cable to suit a 3-pin socket, and it also comes with a Type 2 to Type 2 charging cable, both bundled with the vehicle. Now we've got controls up here to close the tailgate or to both close it and lock the vehicle, but we're going to move on to range, battery, and charging info next. The EQE 300 SUV has an 89 kilowatt hour usable battery. That's good enough to provide 542 kilometers of range in mixed driving, Mercedes says, at 16.4 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. We saw about 20 kilowatt hours per 100 Ks in our mixed driving, which was biasing slightly higher speed country driving. That would give us a real world range of 445 kilometers, but we still need to do our official Chasing Cars range and recharging tests. Mercedes does claim that an 80% recharge can be done in 33 minutes at a peak speed of 170 kilowatts. When it comes to servicing, the EQE SUV is pretty flexible. It can go 25,000 Ks between services, but a 5-year, 125,000 kilometer service plan is on the pricey side for an EV at $4,085. In terms of warranty, the EQE is pretty good. 5 years unlimited kilometers on the car, and 10 years, 250,000 kilometers on the high voltage stuff, including the battery. That compares to, say, 7 years, 150,000 kilometers in the Kia EV9. So, what is the Mercedes-Benz EQE SUV like to drive? Well, to get our first impressions, I've come down to a fairly wet and rainy day on Melbourne's Mornington Peninsula. Now, we will be doing more extensive testing of the EQE SUV on our testing roads in Sydney and at our performance testing facility, so make sure you subscribe to Chasing Cars in order to catch that more detailed stuff later. But for today, I'm happy to give you my first impressions on this vehicle, which I think is an important one for Mercedes. The EQC has soldiered on for a number of years, but is now no longer on sale. There's a few left in stock. There's a new EQC coming, but Mercedes has concentrated its EV effort largely on sedans over the last year or so with the EQS and the EQE sedan. But of course we know now that, almost everybody wants an SUV. So the EQE SUV is a crucial entrant in this mid-sized premium crossover segment. And, EV is the way this part of the market is now shifting quite quickly. So how does this vehicle go? Well, like a few Mercs we've seen lately, this brand appears to be subtly returning to doing what it does best, which is comfort and opulence and luxury. This vehicle is not trying to be overtly sporty. It might be wearing AMG styling, but that's largely meaningless. At this level of the range, the EQE 300 rear-wheel drive, this vehicle is going after comfort, and I think that's good. Whether it achieves it is a separate question. At the other end of the EQE SUV lineup will be the AMG version, the EQE 53. This is actually AMG's first crack at doing a fully electric SUV, and we're yet to see what that vehicle is like. Of course, I'm looking forward to driving it. It's got 1,000 Newton meters of torque, which sounds insane. The EQE 300 does not have 1,000 Newton meters of torque. Instead, it has a single rear motor producing 180 kilowatts of power and 550 Newton meters of torque, which is still generous. It's what we would have, seen from a V6 or a 6-cylinder Mercedes SUV in the past. And I think that's a good analogy to think about here. The EQE 300 feels like a really nice, balanced rear-wheel drive station wagon in a lot of ways. Of course, we're sitting at SUV height. But this brings me to a point which I think you should consider, which is that you may not need all-wheel drive. So I'm driving on fairly slippery roads today, and I don't need all-wheel drive. Here in the rear drive EQE, the traction and stability control are more than good enough to get the job done. You should really only go for the all-wheel drive version of this car if you're going to be driving on low traction surfaces a lot of the time, gravel, snow, or you really want that performance kick from having the second motor on the front axle, and that's what the EQE 350 4MATIC is all about. The EQE 350 4MATIC has exactly the same specification level as the EQE 300, but it is adding a smaller motor to the front axle to give you a combined 215 kilowatts of power and quite a bit more torque than the rear drive car as well. But if I were you, I'd probably only buy the 350 if you were going to be driving on low traction surfaces a lot, like snow or gravel, or you really want that extra performance punch because it does slash the 0 to 100 time. But for most people, the EQE 300 is going to be plenty, and this is a really nice balanced rear-wheel drive car. There is, however, a limited edition EQE 500 available probably only between now, October 2023, and the end of the year. And that is a non-AMG high-powered version of the EQE. It's got 858 Newton meters of torque. So if you want a really fast EQE, but you don't want it to have that overt AMG styling, the EQE 500 could be great. And I personally find that very appealing. So if I was going to go in and order or purchase an EQE SUV now, it would be a 300 or a 500. There is an EQE 53 AMG, up to 1,000 Newton meters of torque in that vehicle, and AMG bespoke motors, suspension and brakes. And I'm looking forward to seeing how that goes, as it's AMG's first effort at an all-electric SUV. Should be fascinating. But for now, the EQE 300 certainly gets the job done. It's all about dignified, comfortable progress, rather than going as fast as possible in a straight line. So just how dignified is it? Well, that depends on which suspension package you go for. So often the case these days with luxury SUVs, you have to go for the suspension upgrade for it to feel truly premium, and so it goes with the EQE. Now the car I'm driving now just has the basic suspension, steel springs, passive dampers, and most of the time it does a fine job. It's good in terms of its primary ride. It isolates out undulations in the road pretty well, but it starts to struggle when it comes to pockmarks, expansion joints, potholes, that sort of thing, where the big heavy wheels and tires can sort of glump through bumps and cause a bit of a jar into the cabin. Upgrading to the Airmatic air suspension with adaptive dampers is going to help dial out more of these imperfections and give you more of the comfortable, quiet ride that a relatively expensive Mercedes SUV really should be providing. So for me, that's an easy upgrade. Also worth considering is the rear axle steering, which gives you up to 10 degrees of additional steering out of the rear axle to make it more maneuverable at low speed while adding stability at higher speed. Certainly good if you live in a tight area or, the inner city. This feature will really help you out. In terms of the general handling of the vehicle, it is balanced and it's capable up to a point. You never forget that the EQE SUV is pretty heavy, and so you do need to take your time turning into corners. On a dry day, I think you could probably push on pretty hard. On a wet day like this, you do need to take your time a little bit, respect the mass of the vehicle. Ultimately, it is faithful, the steering is reliable, there's not a huge amount of feedback coming through the wheel, grip levels are decent, but bringing it to a stop, a hurried stop from high speed, it does feel heavy, and occasionally you can get a little bit of bucking on the brake, which is, I suppose, less dignified than you might expect. Now, speaking of the brakes, we do have regen braking in the EQE. It's not quite one pedal drive, but there is a strong recuperation mode. However, an odd quirk is that as the regen braking kicks in, the brake pedal actually moves away. So the brake pedal is simulating someone using it to brake. Now that sounds okay, but the problem is when you're not getting enough stopping force out of the regen brakes, you then move your foot to add some braking pressure through the brake pedal. And you can often find that the brake pedal is not where you expect it to be. And because your foot has applied only enough pressure as required for if the brake pedal was at the top of its travel, you haven't done enough. So then you need to go in for a third braking attempt, pushing the pedal further and deeper because it was moved away from you. This is counterintuitive. It should just be stripped out. We don't need the brake pedal to be moving robotically as it does in this car. I don't think anyone else does it this way. It doesn't really work, so Mercedes should just scrap that. The refinement is pretty decent. Wind noise is hushed. There is some tyre noise from the big wide tyres fitted to this vehicle, but I think it's bearable, and of course you can turn up that brilliant Dolby Atmos stereo to counter it, but I wouldn't mind it being just a little bit more hushed on coarse chip. I think you might be able to hear it now. I'm doing 80 k's an hour on a coarse chip B road, and it could just be a little bit more hushed, I think. Now the safety features are well done. Strong lane centering, adaptive cruise control, blind spot monitoring, 360-degree camera. It makes life pretty easy, and it's also relatively simple to turn off the systems that you don't want with 2 taps on the screen over here, which is pretty well executed. So those are my first impressions of the new Mercedes EQE SUV. Now we've obviously got more testing to do. We've got our highway and urban range tests. We've got our EV recharging test for this car, and that will come in a later video. But based on my gut today, I think Mercedes have played a pretty straight bat with the EQE SUV. If you already have a Mercedes GLE or GLC SUV, you will feel right at home in this vehicle. It's easy to drive, it's comfortable, it's not trying to be the sportiest vehicle in the segment, and I think in base model form, it's actually quite attractively priced given the very high level of standard specification in this car. I wish it did have a bit more customization. I wish it was available with smaller wheels. I don't think you need 21s on this car, but those things are kind of nitpicking around the edges. For most people, an AMG line EQE 300 SUV is going to be heaps of car if you're looking for a premium SUV. As for whether it's better than the BMW or the Audi, I think the BMW iX punches to a higher level of dynamic capability than this car, but it is more expensive to get a desirable one. And as for the Audi, it's definitely less efficient than the Mercedes EQE SUV, which is actually reasonably good in terms of the range it will offer you, especially on the highway. Now, those are my first impressions. Keen to do more testing with this car, but for now, what do you think of the EQE SUV? Let us know down below in the comments. Let us know anything you want to see us do with this car, any comparisons. While you're there, hit subscribe and the notification bell if you've enjoyed this video. Feel free to share it with a friend. And as always, thank you for watching Chasing Cars.